Dearly beloved, we're gathered here today to celebrate Doug Smith, who's a software engineer and artist living in Vermont. Doug works with scaled systems for telecommunications and has a passion for AI and ML technologies and their application in art. So thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and welcome Doug.
Hey, nice to see you all. Let me get my screen share started. And let's see. I will find it. I think, all right. Hopefully it looks like a slide deck.
Yeah.
Great, awesome. All right. First of all, thank you to everybody for taking the time to come to this talk. And also to Lydia and the Northern New York Library Network for putting this together. I know it's not easy, and I'm excited to have the chance to talk to you all about this. The format I'll use is to run through this deck and then do questions afterwards, but I will try to keep an eye on chat as well. So if you have burning questions, feel free to ask them. And yeah, let's get right into it. So my name is Doug Smith, as you've heard for the third time at this point, and I am a software engineer and I'm an artist. I studied fine art at Munson Williams Proctor Institute, which back in the day we called the Munstitute, but I believe people call it Munson these days. It was before Pratt bought the school that was in Utica, New York. I went on to become a software engineer, long story, but it was living in Utica that got me exposed to the Adirondacks, and I found a love for the Adirondacks. So something I've been working on is a project that I call ADKLegends, which is a kind of visual historical fiction of the Adirondacks that uses AI ML tools. So today what we'll do first is I'll give you a tour of ADKLegends and show you some of these pieces. And then we're gonna take a quick crash course on AI generative art. And I guess one thing I just want to say quickly is when I say AI, that's artificial intelligence, as everybody knows. However, whenever I say it, I really mean artificial intelligence and machine learning. I think that there's a lot in the media where we hear artificial intelligence and it sounds like scary or something like that. But at the end of the day, it's machine learning technology. These are just computer programs that use technology that's been around for a while, and it has gotten rather good in the last few years, which is why we see this boom. I want to look at something that we call bias and ambiguity in AI generated art, and also happens with large language models like a chat GPT. So we'll dig into that a bit and look at how we can address those kind of things. I'm going to go over a bunch of resources that you can use. You can try this out today. I'll give you some places where you can go and you can try out the same kind of things that I'm doing with ADKLegends yourself. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the digital concept art techniques that I use, because you might see what I'm doing with ADKLegends and you might ask, why am I not getting the same kind of results? But you can with a couple techniques that you can learn. And I left it off the agenda, but I have another section that I call Is It Art? And really what I'm trying to do is to get you to think about the intersection between art and technology. And then I've got a couple of resources. So let's get into it. ADKLegends. The gist of ADKLegends is that I take a kernel of an idea from something from ADK history, and I really like things that come from like folklore or from a word of mouth tradition, because they're juicy and they're fun and they can be kind of dramatic. So in this particular piece, I took a snippet that was from a Seneca Ray Stoddard guidebook. where he gives all kinds of places to visit and how to get there in the Adirondacks. But he, of course, has these excellent stories. And he had this one story of Mitchell Sabatis, who's an Abenaki guide, and he had in his guiding one of his sports, one of his clients, he encountered a catamount, and I just thought it could be quite the dramatic portrayal. So I put this together and I tried to make it in a kind of albumin print style, like an old school photography, but if you're familiar with the technology of photography from those days, you couldn't quite get an action shot like this. You needed like still subjects. So it was fun for me to kind of put those together. So I'll run through a few more of these examples. And yes, everything here uses artificial intelligence, generative art techniques, but also combined with a number of techniques that are used for digital concept art. This particular piece displays the idea of Jack Rabbit Johansson, who was a like pioneer in cross-country skiing and skiing as a whole. Before there was the concept of a lift, there was no distinction between Nordic skiing and alpine skiing. So in those days, it was just skiing. But we think of it more like a cross-country skiing, and he would do these huge tours, and I love to ski. I love all kinds of outdoor activities in the Adirondacks and anywhere, but especially the Adirondacks. And I thought it could be exciting to portray Jackrabbit doing something that would resound with the kind of like extreme sport mentality that we have today. Like, could he have been hucking it off of a cliff? This one is for Julia Preston, who was the first woman to get a guiding license in New York State, and I just had a ton of respect for her. And from the guides that I know, which are mostly fishing guides, in this kind of uh area, is it's a lot of work that you got to put in to like even start doing that job. So I just was imagining that Julia would have spent a lot of time out there scouting, looking around before she actually took one of her clients on a guided trip. One of my favorite subjects is Adirondack French Louis, who was he's a hermit, but he was like a friendly hermit that basically everybody loved, who was in the speculator region. And he was known for going on kind of sprees after his trapping season, where he'd make a bunch of money for him. He'd head into town and he would just spend his money freely. And he was remembered for doing things like buying a bunch of candy and giving it away to kids. And he's just very popular and as a like friendly uh friendly hermit. And I love the book Adirondack French Louis. So he's appears a number of times throughout the pieces that I do. Uh, Another figure that I just happen to love the story of is Emma Mead, and she was just an awesome entrepreneurial spirit who also kind of had like an excellent heritage that she followed, and she just sounded like such a cool person. So I'm always trying to find these like little hints of something and then try to reimagine it. And a lot of times I'm kind of thinking, if I were to make a movie about that was like a historical fiction of the Adirondacks, what would it look like? What would the characters that I would put in? What kind of things would I want to portray? And one last example is I like railroads. They're not the most exciting history to everybody, but they're kind of a interesting part of Adirondack history. Like when we get the vacation boom into the Adirondacks in the mid 1800s, of course, the train is the like primary mode of transit to get you from like major points into the Adirondacks. And they also wound up kind of centralizing people in a way compared to the automobile, where people become really dispersed. So I feel like you get history in these like very specific areas and places, which always intrigues me. But in one of the books that I have about railroads, there's a section on unique railroads, and one of those was at Camp Topridge, one of the great camps on Upper Saranac Lake, for this kind of dual track system that had these red and white canopies, but I could not find any pictures of them, so I imagined it on my own. And I think that it probably wouldn't have been quite as dramatic as this. I think that there are 150 feet long tracks that lead up from the lake. So dramatization is absolutely something that I'm looking for. So let's take a look at some of the AI generative art techniques that I use. So we're going to look at kind of a like, how do you actually do this from a like real person standpoint? Like, what would you do? And the first thing that you can do is what we call text to image. So the user provides a prompt, which is the description of the imagery that you want to generate. And here in this example, it's an empire apple hanging from a tree that's glistening in the sun while it's wet, et cetera, et cetera. And in this case, Bing Image Creator is the tool that was used here, and the technology behind that produces this image based on the text that you have. So you can put in here anything that you imagine, and you might get something that resembles what you have. And we'll look at some of the subtleties here of the like results that you get in a minute. But another important thing that you might not have seen initially, if maybe you played with something like Bing Image Creator, is there's another technique which is called image to image. So in this particular case, I took a photograph while I was at Camp Santinoni, which is in the upper left-hand corner. And then I processed this as image to image. So I provided an image, this photograph that I took, and then a text saying a painting of a porch of a great log cabin, because great camp might not be understood quite as well. I wanted to give a gist of what was happening. But what I really wanted was like a painting as the output. So on the right, you'll see 4 different ways that this was kind of converted from the original image to a painting. So there's a prompt and an image involved. So these are kind of the 2 basic building blocks that you use in this. And I'll get into some of the subtleties of how these are put together and kind of layered on top of one another. But you might be wondering, how exactly does it work? So when these kind of systems are put together, there's kind of a like behind the scenes thing that has happened before your image is going to be generated. And then there is the moment that your image is generated. So on the left side here, you see there's training. So something called a model has to be trained. That model is a vector database of weights. And without having to get into the details of exactly what that means, is originally, literally billions of images have been fed into a computer program that analyzes and compares that with what the program has already learned, and it puts information about that into a model. So before you ever go to generate an image, somebody beforehand has trained a model to be used during inference. So the phase when you go and generate the images, we call inference, like it's going to infer what it needs to do based on your prompt. In this phase, you enter your prompt, a glistening apple, or in this case, a submarine. In this example, that goes into a program to generate the images, and it uses that model that was trained in the initial phase. And we'll talk about this training a little bit more. And when you get a little bit deeper into it, so this is talking about the inference, the generation phase. We start with a prompt, and then it goes through a text encoder and an image generator. So that text encoder is trying to take the words that you use. So like this is supposed to be a steampunk styled submarine on Lake Champlain. So it's trying to figure out, okay, which part of these words are you talking about do I associate with imagery that I've been trained on? So there's a text encoder and an image generator, and then at the end you get an image. So let's talk a little bit about bias and ambiguity, and we'll talk about bias first. And in this example, what I did was I prompted for a Vermont landscape photograph. And something that you'll notice about all of these landscape photographs is, or depictions of a landscape photograph, is they're all in fall. And it's for a really intuitive reason. When people take photographs in Vermont, many people take them in fall because people love to come to Vermont for the fall foliage. And we know that that's biased because, well, granted, we do have a lot of hardwoods in Vermont. It does help us out. It's still gorgeous in New York. It's still gorgeous in New Hampshire. But it's a like Vermont trope, right? So because during the training phase, so many of the images of Vermont are in the fall, there's a bias towards fall. And we'll see this with other subjects too. So if I just prompt for New York, it's assumed New York City because, of course, there are so many more pictures taken of New York City than anywhere else in New York. And I want you to think about it for a moment, how this can happen for any subject that can be visualized. And that's for people, that's for history, that's for anything. These kind of biases can wind up in the training data. And I think that they're important to consider. So think about that a little bit and the implications of it. I mean, they could be frightening in particular ways, and something that I think everybody needs to be aware of. These are very vanilla, easy to understand biases, and I think a lot of other ones are very complex. On the other end of the spectrum from bias, we get what I would call ambiguity. So when I want something really specific, it might not make it out the other end after the training and the inference. What I've asked for might be ambiguous. So here I'm prompting for an Adirondack lean-to, and there's like something eerily familiar about them. Like they look sort of like one in a weird way, right? But if we zoom in on it, that's it's not a lean-to. It's like near a lake with some rocks on the shore and everything. Like there's probably lean-tos in the training data. The text encoder understood something about what we were saying when we said an Adirondack lean-to, but it's ambiguous. This is like some sort of I don't even know what to call. It's not, but it's not a lean-to, not the way that we know it. So if you want to generate something that's like really specific kind of imagery, you need to do what's called fine tuning a model. So that's where you would take the model that's been trained and then you would fine tune it with something a little bit more specific. So this is something that I have done is I have collected photographs of lean-tos and then I've added captions to those. Some of those might be done automatically with another artificial intelligence to go and caption those images to say, oh, this is a lean-to in the summer, this is a lean-to at night, this is a lean-to in the winter. And all of those captions and images get fed into a computer program, and then they create an addition to that model in one form or another. So after I've gone and trained that particular model, I can produce images that look more specifically like an Adirondack lean-to. So these aren't perfect. These are a very raw example of what comes out with the model that I've trained. And you can see that this is really more a lean-to that you would recognize, right? It's dark inside as usual. The land has been kind of cleaned up around it because everybody picks up every twig off the ground. So there's also a kind of bias in there too, right? Like these are based on the pictures that I selected, right? So it's going to have a bit of an opinion there one way or another. I want to take a look at some of the tools that are out there and ones that you can absolutely try today. And depending on how interested you are or how much money you want to spend, you can try these in a bunch of different ways. But the first one that I would recommend is Bing Image Creator. So there are a lot of pros towards using Bing Image Creator. The number one is if you have a Microsoft account, you can go and use it today. It's free to get a Microsoft account and you can go try it right away. And it uses a backing technology called DALL-E 3. And DALL-E 3 is widely regarded as having the best prompt coherence of any of the technology out there, which means it understands what you want to have in your prompt in a very detailed way, and it's very good at outputting what you have put into it. So it's easier to use. Some of the other tools are a little bit more raw, and part of the reason that this is so good is that it actually works in tandem with the technology that ChatGPT uses. So you can also use ChatGPT to generate images. However, with ChatGPT, you do need a paid account in order to generate images. It also only generates 1 or 2 images at a time. Bing will usually output 3 or 4 images at a time. So uh, you get a selection to choose from. But one thing technology-wise that's interesting about what DALL-E 3 does, which is a technology made by OpenAI, which is the company that makes ChatGPT, is that it uses something called a multimodal model. This means that the technology works in multiple modes at the same time. So ChatGPT outputs text, DALL-E 3 outputs images. They put these together to work in both modes, text and images. So something that's happening behind the scenes when you use Bing Image Creator or ChatGPT is the prompt that you put in, a picture of an apple, it's actually embellishing that for you and adding some more detail and things to the prompt that it puts into the image creator for you. So this is it's not a raw interface to creating the images. It is an abstracted interface. So you're kind of like sitting above it a bit, and then there's some magic that's been done for you, which is just ChatGPT doing its thing, but specific to the image generator. Um, Another technology that I think is really interesting is something called Midjourney. It's very powerful and it has really great stylized kind of opinion. I think that the training data that's been put in there is more curated. So I think that the creators of this have picked out art styles that they really like and they think will make for like really creative and cool output. And I tend to agree with their opinions. I really like Midjourney a lot. And the the other two are very easy. You just need to log on to a web browser and use them. Midjourney is a little bit different because it actually works through a chat application called Discord, which is actually popular with gamers for like organizing their online games, chatting about the games that they're playing. So if you're a gamer, it'll be very familiar to you, or maybe younger people that you know, and should be easy, but it uses what I would call a command line syntax, which is you have to like type in a particular command to get it to do a thing, which might be something that you're not familiar with. It's not, it sounds scarier than it is. It's not difficult to input a command on the command line, and there are plenty of YouTube videos out there. So if you're interested in this space, I would say give it a try. They usually have a free trial of like 25 images that you can generate. It's very cool, and I use it a lot. I like it quite a bit. Um, Adobe, of course, known for Photoshop and a multitude of other graphic design tools, has their own answers as well. It's still very much a growing thing at Adobe. So their product, Firefly, is their image generation software suite using artificial intelligence. And if you have a Photoshop license already, you can already use some of these things within Photoshop. They call it generative fill, and it's like you can basically like circle an area and say like I want a tiger here, and then it'll put a tiger in for you. So really good user interface. Adobe has always been known for great user interface for graphics and graphic design. However, you need to have some familiarity with those tools in order to use it. Last but not least is a technology that I use heavily for ADKLegends, which is called Stable Diffusion. And Stable Diffusion has this kind of dichotomy with it, that it is very, very powerful, but is also fairly difficult to use. And also bring it back to what I was saying about gamers before, is if you know somebody that's like a PC gamer, they probably actually already have the skills to install and use this software, because it uses the same kind of specific computer hardware that you use for video games on a computer, which is a GPU, a graphics processing unit, which does basically floating point mathematics very, very quickly. So it can be used to generate graphics for games. It can be used to generate artificial intelligence images. So there's that. Now, it's also an open source technology, which I'll talk about a little bit. But something I want to talk about overall is censorship. So basically, all of these technologies that I listed, minus Stable Diffusion, are very censored. And they're going to be censored at a potentially a variety of levels. They could be censored during the training phase, where they omit certain things from the training, or at the inference during generation. So something that some of these tools have is they have an artificial intelligence moderation layer, where before they show you the images, there's another artificial intelligence looking at that image and then saying, is this dangerous or inflammatory or something else that we don't want to have represent us as a centralized company that's providing this technology, be it OpenAI, Adobe, Midjourney. They don't necessarily want inflammatory imagery or what they might consider dangerous imagery to be associated with that. So that is something that they're doing. It's not perfect technology, but with something like a Stable Diffusion, which is open source, there is none of that. So I work for a company called Red Hat, which provides an open source Linux distribution. And so I work on open source software all the time. And what that means is all of the source code that I produce is publicly available. You can go download the computer code and look at it. You could change it. You can add it to your system. It's basically like being able to open up the hood on a car and take every part out and fix it and look at it or change it, re-engineer it, remachine it. Um, and it's a really important thing for a community software development, where you can get people in the public collaborating together and working on these tools. So we're seeing more and more of a growing community in the artificial intelligence and machine learning space. And one of those particular kind of hubs is called Hugging Face. So Hugging Face, similar to another social coding pro platform, GitHub gives a way for people to kind of like get on. It looks sort of like a social media. You like have your friends that you follow, you have like your favorite projects, and then you can kind of like see the news flashes like, hey, this person made an update to this software. Do you want to see what that change is? So these are really great tools for encouraging um, that kind of collaboration. So let's take a look now at some of the digital concept art techniques, sort of the like history and the way that I'm using them as well for ADK Legends. This is a piece that I had been working on that is inspired by the idea of Where's Waldo, like having a like find the hidden object kind of a thing. So on the left is like the full view of it, and then the two panes on the right are like zoom in to show you some of the detail here. And I wanted to show you this in particular so that maybe you can see how the concept art techniques that I'm using relate to this, and I use it in one of the examples as well. So just to give you a moment to look at this, and then you can see kind of how I put it together. But I had a ton of fun putting this together because I just felt like I could keep adding more and more ideas and details of things that I thought were fun. And this was inspired by the idea of the Murray Rush. So when William H. Murray wrote a book about the Adirondacks, it drove tons of people in the like 1870s-ish, late 1860s maybe, to rush to the Adirondacks to get in on this brand new idea of a vacation. And I was just trying to think, oh, what kind of things would be going on there. So in its own campy, folk arty kind of a way that I just thought was fun and fit along with that. So looking at the history of the like digital concept art techniques that I use, really the kind of the like formative idea behind a lot of the stuff that we're doing digitally was something that was used in early filmmaking, which is called matte painting. So the gist of it would be if you were a matte painter, what you would do is you take a sheet of glass, you would paint some kind of scenery on it, almost like you would have for like a set scenery in drama, like on a live stage, but it would be on glass. So then that way you could film that piece of glass with whatever fictional thing that you wanted on it, potentially, and put that in front of a live landscape. And then you could have actors in front of it. So here I've got like an example of the Colosseum in the middle of a field, and you could have like an actor walk across it, and you could have like say birds flying behind it, so you get this like illusion that there was this scenery there that wasn't actually there. And this technique is just expanded upon digitally. And so one technique that I use quite frequently is called photo bashing. And it basically just means you're bashing together a bunch of photos to get the idea that you want. So in this particular example, I took some photographs that I had. So one is some French fries that I was holding in Brussels, Belgium. And then I took a picture of my cat, Juniper, and then I quickly doodled a princess tiara for her, and I mashed all of those together to get what we have on the bottom right, which is my cat Juniper with a princess crown in Grand Place in Brussels, Belgium. So didn't exist before, but now my cat, who has always lived in Vermont, got a quick pretend trip to Belgium. And that is the gist of photo bashing. Now, in a secondary steps, I can actually apply an image to image technique on top of that photo bash. So on the left, we've got the like Juniper photo bash that I originally made, and then on the right, two different versions. So in that top version, I told my software I want to have a like lot of change in the image. So you can kind of tell that the cat in the right is not Juniper, right? It looks like a different cat, but sort of resembles her, right? Like similar color scheme, etc. But it's a like shorter hair cat. Um, and then in the bottommost one, I actually only I told my software only change parts of this image. So I said, don't change Juniper's face, don't change Juniper's long hair on her chest, just change the edges and the background and only a little bit. So we get a little bit more of the these like edges that don't look perfect are like a bit more blended in, for example, and there are like minor changes to some of the scenery in the background. Kind of the next level of photo bashing is what we call kit bashing. And this also comes from a historical thing that's been done long ago, which is people that would make model railroads would take different kits for models and then they would mix them together. So they would bash together these different kits of model railroad trains and they would make their own unique and new model by mixing the kits together. So this idea has been used in 3D digital art for quite a long time too, that you take like a few different models that people have made, and then you pick and choose the pieces that you want, you kind of mix them together. But for this Murray Rush piece that I made that was where it was Waldo and styled, what I did was I built my own kit first. So I made all of these different assets for like the characters, the scenes, and then I photo bash them together, and then I would in paint them, which is the image to image technique I'm using to say like, take this section and redo it with an image to image. And then not strictly a concept art technique, but something that's available as sort of like a layered model and stable diffusion is something called control net, which is where I can kind of take an image and say, use this as the boundaries for the generation that you're going to have. So I just quickly doodled a like pose to be like, okay, hey, here's the pose that I want to use. And then I fed it into Stable Diffusion. And you can see how some parts of it were kind of honored to get this sort of like dynamic pose that I wanted. Um, because using these techniques allows me to get more of my human created vision into my final product, right? So like I can roll the dice and just use text to image, and sometimes I'll luck out and get something really great. But oftentimes I've got like more of a vision of what I'm trying to create, and I want to iterate the pieces. So I use these techniques to do that. And everything that I've mentioned, all of those go into ADKLegends. So if you go to try Bing Image Creator, for example, and you type in like, oh, I want to pioneer in a Adirondack situation, and you're like, oh, that wasn't as good as ADKLegends. It's because that's only one part of it, right? So I'm doing this in a like layered fashion and a lot of it. And then I have also done training for like specific things like lean-tos, pack baskets. I have a few different like styles that I use to try to like give like a specific bend to the styles that I have to make for like some consistent imagery across my project. So there's other work that's gone in there. So don't get frustrated when you first start. That's just the like first step. It's like your first day at a figure drawing class. You're not going to be You're not going to be using all of the techniques that you'll eventually learn. And then I wanted to talk briefly about the question, is this art? And really what I kind of wanted to look at was like, what is the kind of Venn diagram here between technology and art? So one thing that to me stuck out as an example is the Dada movement, which was sort of the like art is dead art movement with a like lot of absurd and avant-garde ideas. And certainly there was like a frustration with what was happening like in the world of art. If you're going to just take a piece of plumbing, put it on a pedestal and say that's art, it makes us ask a lot of questions about it. And to me, it's clearly art. I mean, I know that Marcel Duchamp didn't create that urinal from scratch, but he did apply it. And I think that there's something interesting there. I think there's also something interesting about the opinions of the Dada movement. I also think that there's some interesting history related to photography as well. When photography first came about, there were a lot of critics who said, like, this is going to kill art. This is going to make art less valuable. This is going to take artists' jobs. Uh, and I think it's important for us to think about history repeating itself here because photography is largely just considered another art form, like painting or architecture or sculpture or you name it, right? And it also is an important tool. And going just a little bit further back in history as well, is there was also the invention of the mirror, which seems like such an everyday object, but the mirror was actually really important in how drafting perspective was figured out by artists as well. So you could all of a sudden take 3D that you see around you and it's on a 2D plane. You can take measurements of this. Um, you could like put a protractor up to it and see the angle of it. So these are like formative parts of art that were influenced by technology. So I think it's important to think about how art and technology kind of intersect. And then last but not least, I just listed a few of my favorite kind of resources, sort of as an overview on like all of these things. But one book about artificial intelligence that I really enjoyed is called Super Intelligence, and it's really a bunch of thought experiments about what would happen if we got an artificial intelligence that is smarter than a human, right? So that's why he's calling it super intelligence, is that it exceeds the intelligence of a human. And something that he argues is that you need to have general domain intelligence in this artificial intelligence. A lot of the artificial intelligence that we have today, we call good old-fashioned AI. And I mean, we really still do that, have that today. Like ChatGPT is really good at outputting text. That's what it does. It outputs text. Stable Diffusion, really good at outputting images, but not really good at like an everyday thing that a person might do in their like course of their day, like figure out how to like substitute an ingredient when you're going to cook something based on what's around the house and what you can intuitively use, and how to solve that in a 3D space where you have to like move one thing to another. So what's going to happen when we have this leap? And there's a lot of talk about AGI, artificial general intelligence, which would be like that general domain knowledge for an artificial intelligence. A lot of people are like, oh, that's a scary Terminator style thing that's going to happen any day now. Um, However, this author has been studying this field since the 90s, and at least when the book was written in 2015 or 2016, when I read it, he thought that we were 150 years out from an artificial general intelligence. So while I think that there's quite the booms, I don't think that there's anything to be scared of. I also recommended a book that's on drawing called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain because it was the book that got me uh, confident about my abilities to create art. It's a great book and worth it. And then just a couple of my favorite Adirondacks books, which is Adirondack French Louis, who I mentioned French Louis, and then Tales from an Adirondack County, which is just all hearsay, cool folklore tales, and I love it. And that all being said, I'd love to open the floor to some questions or discussions. Would be awesome.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. Thank you, Doug. That was great. I am gonna stop sharing that screen. Wow. This is really wonderful. Yes. Do other folks have questions? I mean, like I was taking a bunch of notes. I always find it super interesting to think about like the history of technology, I guess, which would be maybe why I asked you to present, but I thought it was really interesting to think about like the mirror as a technology. Yeah. Do you have I guess like where did you first find the books that you were inspired by at the end there, like the Ted Aber book and like where did you first meet those characters?
That's a great question. So, well, French Louis is a bit easier one for me because I like specifically remember how I was introduced to that book, which was when I lived in central New York in Utica. A few of my friends knew of the book and they were like my fishing buddies and they would quote the book all the time because it has like great stories about hunting and fishing, etc. And so they'd always be mentioning those quips. So I had to read it since, of course, my buddies were referencing it. And it was that book really sparked my interest in Adirondack history. Tales of an Adirondack County, I can't remember how I discovered that book, but one thing that I'm doing constantly with my like own small personal library or the occasional books that I loan is I'm always trying to cross-reference stuff. So I do keep a notebook and I'm taking notes from my books and I've always got like playing cards stuffed in different books and this is probably the worst system ever to librarians, but I'll be like, this book, Queen of Hearts. And they'll be like, oh, yep, yep, I know where it is. Um, so I love to cross-reference, and I also do cross-reference with the internet regularly, especially just a plain old Google search, right? I do that a lot. I'll occasionally try to cross-reference stuff or generate ideas with ChatGPT or a large language model. However, it's super dodgy for history stuff because of a like well-known issue in this space that we call hallucinations, which is where this technology is, it's just trying to complete what you asked it to do. And it'll do whatever it can based on the like data that's in its model in order to do that. So it might just make up stuff, which can be really frustrating when you're like, no, it's this person, right? Like it's French Louis. Like I know that these are word of mouth stories that were like collected. They were like collected like a generation late. Like they were collected in the 1950s for somebody who had passed away in the early 1900s, right? So they're removed. But there's like some kernels of truth. Like we know where French Louis is buried. We know people loved him. Like it's about that. So I will use that stuff cautiously. I'll mostly use it for idea generation. But usually what winds up happening is I'll be taking my notes from the books that I've collected. I'll be like doing some secondary Google searching research, and then I might run into another book, and then I'll be like, okay, cool, I gotta find that one, etc.
Hmm, wonderful. Thank you. There's a question in the chat that says, thanks for a great session. Can you say more about photo bashing? Are there any prompts specifically helpful for this?
Great question. That's an awesome question. So something that I will do sometimes when I create a photo bash is I will use a technique that's called interrogation, which is sort of like um, instead of going from text text to image, it goes image to text. So it'll generate prompts that will create similar images. So sometimes if I'm not sure how to put it, like my cat in Grand Place in Brussels, like that's like a lot of prompt coherence that my tools would need. But sometimes I'll run it through an interrogation and then use that uh, use that technique. Looks like so also sometimes I'll just take a wild guess too, and I'll just put in like black and white cat, comma, Brussels, Belgium, comma, Princess Tiara. And sometimes that'll help too. So sometimes just intuitively you can do it. Um, Great question about photo bashing. Is it legal? And I think that really comes down to the source of the images that you use. Um, so yeah, good chance that if you're like taking a famous copyrighted piece and you're photo bashing it, might I have a feeling that a court of law would probably say like that's not a fair usage. But I'm not a lawyer. But certainly if you take your own stuff and you mash it together, totally legal. And if you reprocess it with artificial intelligence, I guess there's also the like ethical question too, like I took that picture of Juniper and I like changed it a bit. Like I feel like what I did like ethically was like the right thing, right? So
Yeah.
that's the other part. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think of also not a lawyer. The Empire State Library Network provides services too. You can totally ask this question to Cole and our Ask a Lawyer service. But yeah, I mean, it's I'm not a lawyer, but I took a copyright institute, and I would just say that the unique expression of an idea is part of what is in consideration for fair use, right? So I don't know, I would think you would be able to make a photo bash of your cat in front of the Microsoft logo or something, but I'm not a lawyer. Like I guess that maybe is about trademark. But anyways, I think that those are really interesting questions to think about how you put them together. And I guess I would ask the the because fair use and copyright is always like contextual too. Like I think about like if is this something that you're using for like a class assignment or professional development, or is this something that you're how does it impact the market value of something? And I think that's where like fair use and the unique expression of an idea can be really useful. But yeah, like I said, we have a Ask a Lawyer service.
That's really cool. You have that. That's really useful. Something I think that's kind of interesting in this question as well is there's definitely questions about is it legal or ethical for companies that do the training of these models to
Mm.
have taken all of these images off the internet and then run them through their training model. So this is something that Adobe is touting heavily is Adobe has their own stock photography and like clip art program where people have already uploaded and are selling their photography and their clip art and Adobe has whatever legalese in their agreement to say that they can use that. So Adobe is touting that their product kind of leapfrogs the potential issue for copyrighted images in the training data. Very interesting question. I'm glad you asked because I think we're at such a we're in the very spring of what's happening here, and there are many seasons to come.
Hmm. Okay, cool. One more question. Do you see? Yeah, you see it.
Yeah, so Roberta, for the phrase photo bashing, I would say try it as a prompt term because it definitely will wind up being in the text encoder and trained in the training data to some extent. But for sure, the um, end goal of what you want to do, at least in my particular case, is to do the bashing yourself, and it can be it doesn't have to be like Albrecht Dürer's praying hands perfection or whatever. Like you can just kind of like circle stuff and copy and paste it and get it generally where you want, and then use a tool that has a image to image functionality. So for example, Midjourney has an image to image functionality as well as Stable Diffusion and some of the Adobe tools as well. So something like Bing and Chat GPT, they just have text to image without a image to image component. So photo bashing is not as easily achievable.
Oh, okay. Wow, thank you so much. We are kind of at the end of our time here.